Hello, everyone. Sorry, I'm a bit late, 3 minutes late. But I hope you're excited for this presentation on the different publishing options. So Ingrid was kind enough to offer us to do a webinar, and so this is one of the topics that we at Reedsy talk the most about. Publishing options, self-publishing versus traditional publishing. Um, because since we started 3 years ago, it's one of the recurring questions we get is, should I just self-publish my book or should I try to get an agent? Is there a way to find a publisher after I self-publish my book? Like, is there a way to go from self-publishing to traditional publishing? Even vice versa, if I get an agent, publish my book, can I then get my rights back and self-publish it if the book doesn't work? So we've kind of compiled this presentation over the last few years, and we've been refining it to create kind of a resource for authors who are uncertain about which publishing option, which publishing channel is right for them. So since I'm a bit late, I'm just gonna go directly into the heart of the matter. So to give you a bit of background about who we are, so I'm one of the founders of Reedsy. So you can interact with me on Twitter. Feel free to drop me a line anytime, Ricardo Fayet. And we founded Reedsy around 3.5 years ago. So for those of you who've never heard of Reedsy, who don't know what we are, what we do, we're basically a community of best-in-class publishing professionals. So that's editors, copy editors, developmental editors, proofreaders, also designers, both for cover design, also interior design, illustrators, also marketers, publicists, web designers, ghostwriters. So all the people kind of who worked in the traditional publishing industry and who are now going freelance. We've got some of the best ones on our marketplace. So editors who worked on best-selling books with best-selling authors. We've got the editor, UK editor, who worked on The Martian in the UK. Got editors who've worked with Pulitzer Prize-winning authors. I've got an awesome cookbook editor who's worked with all the famous chefs as well. So whatever the genre, you're probably going to find on Reedsy some of the best editors, designers, and marketers. So now, enough about Reedsy, and let's move on to publishing. So I generally like to start this presentation on publishing options with a few things that authors regularly say to me, and that are big misconceptions or mistakes to make. So the first one is authors who really want to get a traditional publishing deal, but think that they'll just start self-publishing because it's easier, and then they'll get some exposure and find a traditional publisher that way. So that happens for a handful of authors. But what you got to keep in mind is that if you self-publish with the hopes of finding a traditional publisher afterwards, you need to sell hundreds of thousands of copies of your self-published book in order for it to get noticed by agents and publishers. If you self-publish and you get 10,000 sales and you're very happy, you've made some money, and then you go around agents and publishers saying, hey, my book sold 10,000 copies, they're going to be like, great. Come back to us when you write your next book. So if you want a traditional publisher, we'll talk more about that afterwards, you should start querying agents, querying publishers. Don't self-publish if you want a traditional publishing deal. Go after the traditional publishing deal. Another misconception I get is authors who don't want to self-publish because they think self-publishing requires a lot of marketing and doing business, and it's like 90% business stuff and only 10% writing, and they just want to write. And the fact is, authors who just write nowadays don't exist. If you get a traditional publishing deal, even with one of the big five, sure, you'll get a marketing team behind you to help you, but they're going to ask you to do a lot of the marketing. They're going to ask you to interact with fans. They're going to ask you to do book signings. They're going to ask you to have a presence on social networks. They might ask even more of you. And if you work with a smaller publisher, then they're going to ask even more marketing activity from your side. So I'd say marketing is going to be a big part of your job as an author, whether you self-publish or you get a traditional publishing deal. So don't like base your decision on I want to do marketing or I don't want to do marketing, because that's not really an option. Another thing is authors who tell me, oh, I'll just self-publish because I tried querying 20 agents and I only got rejections, so I'll self-publish. Now that's fair enough, but I'd say try to understand why you've got only received standard form rejections after querying 20 agents. Like, if you query that number of agents and you don't even get any kind of personal feedback on your book, there's either something wrong with your query letter or there's something wrong with your book. And if there's something wrong with your book, you don't just want to self-publish it and put it out there, because you're not going to get rejections, you're going to get bad reviews from readers. So if you're getting rejections, try to understand why before you just go like, what the heck, I'll just self-publish. And finally, last misconception is people who tell me, I want to self-publish an ebook, but I want a publisher to handle my print rights. So that means you've already researched the industry, you're savvy, you know that it's really hard to get into bookstores if you self-publish, so you want a publisher to take care of that. That's great, but again, like that print-only deals happen only to 0.1% of authors. Like happen to Hugh Howey and a handful of others. So don't get your hopes up about that. They're very, very rare deals. If you go into self-publishing, do print on demand as well, and don't count on a publisher at some point. It's very, very unlikely that it will happen. Cool. Now, the really important thing to keep in mind nowadays is that it's not just about self-publishing versus traditional publishing. Sure, that's the title of this presentation, but it's just to make it more appealing to everyone. There are countless publishing options out there, so I'm going to try to list those and go through them. This is a very handy graph that Jane Friedman put together, a table where she lists and she updates every year all the publishing options she knows about. And as you can see, it's there's beautiful colors in there, but it's incredibly complicated. Like, to know all this stuff, take a couple of days to learn this table. So I'm going to present it in a slightly more comprehensive way or simpler way in the next few slides. But this is just to give you an idea of how many options are available to authors nowadays. It's not just about self-publishing versus traditional publishing. There's a bunch of things in the middle. There's a bunch of scams in the middle as well that you need to avoid. But it's kind of what state the industry is at and things you should definitely know about if you're looking to publish a book. Cool, so this is what we're going to cover. First, I'm going to go into the main differences between self-publishing and traditional publishing. I said there were things in the middle, so I'll cover that as well. Then I'll go into how to make self-publishing work for you. I'll go a lot quicker on that. What a traditional publisher will do for your book as well. So, and then I'll finish on how to become a hybrid author, because thing to keep in mind is most of the well-selling authors I know who are making a living out of writing are hybrid. So they've either traditional published in the past and switched to self-publishing, or they still do both things, but like hybrid's definitely the name of the game nowadays. Cool, so pros and cons of self-publishing and traditional publishing. You probably know this already, but it's good to recap it. So the great thing about self-publishing is that there are no gatekeepers. You have 100% chance of publishing your book if you publish your book. Traditional publishing, you have around 1% chance of getting a deal. Like, there's only 1% or less than 1% of writers who query agents and publishers hoping to get a trad deal who actually get a trad deal. Now, the great thing about traditional publishing is that if you do get a deal, you're going to get an advance often. So advances nowadays are between $2,000 or $1,000 and $10,000. Don't expect an advance higher than that. They don't give advances higher than that for first-time authors. So that's probably not going to happen unless you're a big-time celebrity writing their memoir, in which case, like, yeah, I don't know why you're listening to this webinar anyway. So if you're not that celebrity writing their memoir, don't expect an advance higher than 10K. Now, if you're self-publishing, obviously you're not getting an advance because you're self-publishing. So unless you give yourself an advance, you're not going to get anything. However, you're actually going to have to pay to get your book produced, because what traditional publishers do is they pay editors to review your book, polish your manuscript, They pay designers to put your book together in a professional form, give it a great cover design. They pay marketers, publicists. All these people you're going to have to pay on your own if you're self-publishing. And in order to produce a book professionally, that's going to cost you between $2,000 and $4,000, sometimes more, depending on what you want to invest on. But I'll go into that later. Now, big pro for self-publishing is that you retain full editorial control, full publishing control, full marketing control. And why I'm saying that's important, because I've heard a lot of horror stories of authors getting a traditional publishing deal, getting super excited, and then finding out that the publisher actually wants to completely change the story. Like, they've written this great literary fiction with a female character, and the publisher is trying to turn it into a chick lit, and they're blasting a chick lit cover on that. And I've seen many authors like walk away at that point from the traditional publishing deal and get the rights back and self-publish, just because the publisher was going in a direction that they didn't want to go. So editorial control might seem like a very non-important thing at this point, but trust me, publishers can sometimes do things that you really won't understand as an author, and they have reasons for that. But if it doesn't align with your vision for your book, then you're probably better off self-publishing. Then in terms of royalties, well, that's the big reason why a lot of people are self-publishing nowadays. If you publish your book, upload it to Amazon, you're going to get 70% of the retail price of the book, of the ebook. In traditional publishing, you're going to get between 20 and 25% of net. So 25% of 70%, so around 15% of the retail price of the ebook. So there's the difference is between 70% if you self-publish, 15% if you publish traditionally. So sure, you're getting an advance, but then you have to recoup that advance and to earn that advance, and then you're only getting very low royalties. And obviously, same on print royalties, much higher in self-publishing, traditional publishing. And finally, I urge you to start thinking right now, whether you've published already or not, to think about your rights. Your rights are the most important thing to you, should be the most important thing to you as an author. It's the only way you make money. When you publish traditionally, generally with a big five, they're going to give you deals. They're going to offer you deals where they acquire all the rights, where you have to surrender all the rights. So rights are for ebook, for print, for audio, for foreign rights, for translations, movie, TV, things like that. If you surrender those rights to a traditional publisher in exchange for an advance, that means that if your book is adapted as a TV series by Netflix or HBO, if your book becomes the next Game of Thrones, then you're not going to see a lot of money from that. Your publisher is. So you don't want that. You want to possibly retain those rights as long as possible. Cool. So a bit more about royalties. In traditional publishing, I said you're going to get around 25% net, so 15% for ebooks. Yeah, it's 17.5. For print, it obviously depends on the type of print book. So for hardback, it's generally around 10%. Paperbacks, 7.5. Mass market, 8. So you get an idea of the royalties you can expect. As you can see, it never goes above like 25%. And again, that's why a lot of people nowadays self-publish, because they think they can make more money by self-publishing. Royalties in self-publishing, well, on ebooks, as I said, 70% of your retail price. Audiobooks, 40% of your retail price. So that's where the difference between self-publishing and traditional publishing isn't that big. You do get good deals on audio with traditional publishers. And in print, you obviously get much higher royalties, 20-50% of retail sales. And that's because generally, if you're self-publishing, you're doing print on demand, so you need to pay for the cost of the book, of printing the book, producing the book, and that through print on demand companies like CreateSpace or Ingram Spark, the way they charge you for that is in royalties. So that's why you don't get 70% or more royalties on retail sales for print, and also why it can vary a lot, because depending on your number of pages and complexity of your book of printing is going to be more or less expensive, so you're going to get more or less percentage of the retail price. All right, so now that I've exposed kind of the differences between, on the one hand, self-publishing, the other hand, traditional publishing, I want to go into the reasons why you should pick one or the other. And that's really, really important. Like, I think you should use this framework as authors, if you're hesitating, to make your decision towards one or the other. So there are some right reasons for self-publishing, and there are some wrong reasons. And I'll use the same framework for traditional publishing. So the right reasons for self-publishing is if you're confident that you have a great idea for a book, you know your book's going to sell, and you want to keep the most of the returns because you know you're going to get more royalties self-publishing than traditional publishing. That's a good reason. If you're entrepreneurial minded, then definitely self-publish because, I mean, that's what being entrepreneurial is all about. You take control and you do it yourself. If you want to keep full editorial control over your story, I went over that already. Or if your genre, your story is too niche for a traditional publisher. And that's where self-publishing has really been amazing for a lot of authors and even for a lot of literary genres, is that if you have this nonfiction book on a very, very niche topic that doesn't interest publishers because the market for it's not big enough, you can still self-publish and make good money on it because you know your niche, you can identify it, you can market to it. And while it doesn't make sense for a publisher to acquire your manuscript because the potential for it is not big enough, it does make sense for you to self-publish it. So for niches, for niche topics, self-publishing is very, very attractive. And in fiction, it has even created and helped niches become bigger. Like urban fantasy is mostly self-publishing right now. And it's a huge, huge niche. Like, it's not a niche anymore. It's like one of the main fantasy genres. And most of the authors in there are self-publishing. Now, wrong reasons for self-publishing. So I've stated a couple of those in my misconceptions earlier, is if you've been unable to find an agent and publisher, so you just think, okay, I'm going to self-publish. You can do it, but please do make sure that you understand why your book hasn't been picked up by traditional publishers. Is if it's because there are like huge plot holes in your manuscript, you want to fix those before you self-publish. If it's because your book is too niche, then perfect, go ahead and self-publish it. A lot of authors actually come to me saying, yeah, I want to self-publish because there's a lot of money to be made in that. And a bit less nowadays. This was more the case during the gold rush period a few years ago. Like, I've read that this and that author made a lot of money, so I want to do the same. If you want to go, if you want to make a living out of writing, you should go into that because it's your passion, not because you think you're going to make a lot of money out of it. The reality is most authors don't make a living out of writing. So while it's definitely possible to get there, it's not an easy thing. Like, most authors who make good money out of self-publishing work a lot. They work 15 hours a day or more between writing and marketing. So you should definitely have a passion for it. So going into it for the money is not necessarily a good reason. And finally, yeah, a lot of people self-publish because they think, hey, I don't have the time to look for an agent and a publisher. And what you should realize is that both options, self-publishing and traditional publishing, they're very demanding. Like, sure, if you self-publish, you won't have to look through agents and publishers and write a painful query letter and refine it. But you'll have to do all the marketing of the book on your own, and you'll have to hire editors, and you'll have to hire designers, and you'll have to manage the whole production process, and you'll have to learn about a bunch of things, which can be super exciting if you're entrepreneurial minded, but it's definitely just as much work as researching agents and publishers, if not more. So now, right and wrong reasons for traditional publishing, same idea. So right reasons, there are a few of them. If you want your books to be listed, if you want your books to be in bookstores, if your dream is to have your book in all the major bookstores, like brick and mortar bookstores, then that's only going to happen if you're going to publish traditionally. I personally think authors shouldn't care that much about it, but if you do, then know that traditional publishing is your only option for that. If you don't feel qualified, if you don't feel entrepreneurial and qualified to like manage the production process of the book, try to find a publisher to do it. If it's always been your dream to be a published author, again, I personally don't get it, but if it's your dream, then go for it. And a really good reason is if your book's literary and you want to be considered for literary prizes and reviews and be reviewed by the New York Times and things like that. The thing to know is reviews and prizes don't sell as many books as they used to. They really don't. But if that's your dream, then it's not going to happen if you self-publish. Like most literary prizes are closed to indie authors, which is a shame, but it's how it is. So if you want to win a literary prize, try to find a publisher. Now, wrong reasons for traditional publishing. If you want your book to be advertised everywhere, you want to be the next like superstar, be your book and get your book like on billboards, bookshop windows. That doesn't happen. Like huge marketing campaigns like that showcase a book everywhere only happen for big names who already have a huge following, the Stephen Kings and Neil Gaimans, etc. So if you're a debut author, even with a great book, even if you get a high advance, even if you get a 20K advance, you're not going to get huge marketing from a traditional publisher. If you think self-publishing is too costly, I think that's also a wrong reason to traditionally publish, because sure, it's costly, but if you believe in your book, you're going to recoup that cost afterwards. So if you actually believe in your book, you shouldn't go into traditional publishing because you don't have to lay out money in advance. Like laying out money in advance is an investment you have to make in any business, in any profession. So I think you shouldn't like make a decision just based on the advance and the fact that with self-publishing you have to pay. A lot of authors also tell me that they don't want to market their books, they just want to write. I went over that. And finally, some authors tell me that they don't think they're going to be considered real authors if they self-publish. And that's just like a total misconception, because nowadays, most of the books published are self-published. And most of the books that sell on Amazon, most of the best-selling books on Amazon are self-published. Self-published ebooks represent over 40% of Amazon ebook sales nowadays. So it gives you an idea of the fact that if you self-publish a book, you're going to be just as real an author as if you got a traditional publisher. Cool. So I said there were hybrid options, there were options in between. I'm going to list the main 5. If you want the full thing, go to Jane Friedman's table, but these are really the main things in between that you should know about. So there are hybrid publishers, there are crowdfunding publishers, digital publishers, agent-assisted imprints, and assisted self-publishing. So I'll go quickly over all of them, starting with digital publishers here, because I think they're the easiest to understand. So digital publishers are just like traditional publishers. They're probably going to offer you an advance or not, but they're going to cover your costs. They're going to do the editorial, the design work. They're going to produce your book, just like a traditional publisher. The only difference is that they're going to release your book as an ebook only. And you're going to get more royalties, 25% or to 50% of the retail price than if you'd gone through a regular traditional publisher. So what are digital publishers great for? They're great for books that are mostly purchased in digital form. So that's like most commercial fiction, romance, thriller, fantasy, sci-fi, books where most readers purchase and read ebooks. I see a lot of digital publishers do really great work nowadays. So I've listed a few in my previous slide. There's Canelo, Book Couture in the UK, Rosetta Books in the US. So they're a really good option. And now more and more agents are actually pitching their authors to these digital publishers, because in some genres, it can make even more sense to go to a digital publisher than a big 5 publisher. You're going to make more money going with Book Couture in the UK, and Book Couture has been actually purchased by Hachette, but it's still their own imprint. But yeah, if you are in commercial fiction, definitely consider digital publishers, and most of them are open to direct submission, so you won't need an agent. Another one that's easy to understand is agent-assisted publishing imprints. So what happened, a lot of agents recently had big literary estates. So they held the rights to authors who'd passed away, and so they held the rights to a bunch of books, and they decided to republish them under their own agent imprint. And so that's created kind of imprints, publishing imprints that are actually owned by literary agencies, and that were used in the beginning to just republish in ebook form books from large literary estates. Now, what's happened is that these agents, at least some of them, have started using these agent imprints to publish their front list. So, let's say you get a deal with an agent, so you're represented with an agent. Congratulations. That agent sadly isn't able to place your book with a traditional publisher, or with a digital publisher, or with any publisher for whatever reason. And so they say, look, I haven't been able to find you a traditional publishing deal. Maybe you want to switch agent, or what we could do is we publish you under our agent-assisted imprint. And so that's going to work same as a digital publisher, really, except that imprint's owned by the agency. So that poses the question of conflict of interest, because an agent's going to be both your agent and your publisher. But in some cases, I've seen that work really well. So if your agent offers that a possibility to you, definitely take it into consideration, inspect the contract, as you should always do. But don't just decline it right away. Sometimes it can be a better option even than to finding and signing with a traditional publisher. Then there are hybrid publishers. So the idea with hybrid publishers is really a publisher that's in the middle between self-publishing and traditional publishing. So I said in traditional publishing, you're going to get an advance and they're going to pay for the production of the book. In self-publishing, you pay for the production of the book. In hybrid publishing, what hybrid publishers say is, we share the costs. So we're going to pay for part of the production of the book, you're going to pay for the other part, and then we're going to share the profits. So generally 50-50 royalty split. Now, I personally think it's a great idea. It makes total sense. However, in practice, most hybrid publishers I've seen out there tend to be at least questionable, if not outright scammy. And sadly, that makes sense because let's say you're in that position of a hybrid publisher, very quickly you're going to be tempted to start charging authors more for the production, because most authors don't know how much it costs to produce a book. So if you tell an author, we're going to share costs on the production of your book, you pay $5,000 and I pay $5,000. With the author's $5,000, they're already going to be able to produce the book. So they'll use the author's money to produce the book, and then they won't really care about the sales. So you're basically paying for them publishing the book, and you're only getting half of the royalties afterwards. I'm not saying all hybrid publishers do that, and it's definitely not the idea behind hybrid publishing. However, it's something that is very tempting when you start out as a hybrid publisher, and that I've seen a lot of hybrid publishers kind of turn into very questionable companies as time went on, and they struggled to make money out of sales. So they started charging authors more on the production. Now, assisted self-publishing companies, they're a lot simpler. They're on the self-publishing side of things. So as I said, if you self-publish, you're going to have to find your editors, your designers, your layout designers, put together the book. So you're responsible for the production process. If that sounds like a strain to you, but you still want to self-publish, you can use an assisted self-publishing company. What they do is that they basically offer packages. They handhold you through throughout the whole process. And then they will charge you for, obviously, the production of the book. It's going to be a lot more expensive than hiring individual editors and then designers, but it's an agency, basically. So you get the benefit of the agency. You don't have to do the research, and you have to pay them a markup for their services. And finally, the ones in the middle are really, really interesting. They're crowdfunding publishers. And crowdfunding publishers, so two main ones right now. There's Unbound in the UK and there's Inkshares in the US. And what they do is they work very similarly to a traditional publisher. So you submit your book, most of submissions are declined. For the submissions that are accepted, what they do is they put your book up on their website for crowdfunding, and they've got a good audience. And obviously, you help promote your book during the crowdfunding stages. So people start pre-ordering your book, and if your book gets funded, like if it gets enough pre-orders that it reaches a certain amount of funds raised, then that crowdfunding publisher, Bound or Inkshires, is going to publish your book under a traditional model. So they'll acquire your rights. They won't pay you in advance, but they will use the funds that they raised through crowdfunding to publish the book, to produce and publish the book. They will generally pay you higher royalties, so 50%. And the thing to keep in mind is that their books tend to do well because when the book launches, it already has an audience because it's been up for crowdfunding. It's already received support, so it's already gotten sales in a way before it publishes. So that's quite powerful, and these publishers are doing really well. So don't hesitate to approach them if you're familiar with crowdfunding, if you feel that the idea is interesting. Now, as I said, there are a lot of scams out there. So hybrid publishers are one type of them, but there are a lot of also assisted self-publishing companies that charge like crazy amounts for their services. The most well-known one is Author Solutions. It's a company that has a bunch of different, what they call imprints, but they're like just other assisted self-publishing scams. So iUniverse, Ex Libris, Author House, Westbow Press, basically horrible companies that are going to charge you extortionate amounts of money for editing, for design, and they're going to try to sell you marketing packages on top of that. So there are a lot of scams out there. So whenever you find a publisher, or you receive an email from a publisher or a self-proclaimed publisher or a company offering services, ask yourself the right questions and ask them the right question. Ask them, how do you make money? Do they make money by publishing books on sales? Do they take royalties? Or do you have to pay upfront for services? If you have to pay upfront for services, how much is it? And compare that to market prices, and I'll give you what the market prices are afterwards. If it's a publisher, ask which rights they acquire and for how long. Sometimes authors are so happy because they sign a deal with a traditional publisher without realizing that they're surrendering their rights for I don't know how many years, sometimes 20 years, with no way to get those rights back. What happens? The book doesn't sell. The book gets delisted from all the bookstores, so it isn't stocked in bookstores anymore. Books hasn't had sales, so the publisher isn't interested in future contracts with the author. But they still hold the rights for 20 years, so you can't get the rights back and self-publish books. You've basically given them away, and they're going to sit and collect dust for 20 years, and not even in bookstores. So if you get a traditional deal, be very happy about it because it's very hard, but inspect the terms and get help from a lawyer or from a professional organization. Speaking of which, there are two professional organizations. There's the Ally Alliance of Independent Authors in the UK and the Authors Guild in the US, and they specialize in providing legal help for authors when they get approached by publishers or agents or companies and when there are contracts involved. So if you know nothing about publishing contracts, educate yourself about them and contact these companies as well, because they're there to help. Now, I've been through the different options, self-publishing, traditional publishing, the ones in between. I'm going to spend a little bit more time delving deeper into how to make each option work for you. So I'm going to go over self-publishing now, and then I'll do traditional publishing. So self-publishing, you basically decide your publishing journey. However, you should follow certain tracks that are used to produce books by traditional publishing companies, by successful indie authors, like ways to produce a professional book. There are certain steps you need to follow, and these are the steps I'm going to outline. First, editing, then design, proofreading, which is part of editing as well, then distribution, and throughout marketing. So as you can see here, I purposefully didn't put marketing here at the end after distribution, because marketing your book starts from the moment you write it. You should sort of think about marketing and start putting in place maybe your website, your newsletter, start collecting fans, building a fan base from the moment you start writing. So if you haven't thought about marketing at all yet, start thinking about it right now. I'll give you tips afterwards, things to think about. But first, the editing. You absolutely need to have your book professionally edited before you self-publish it. There are different types of editing, and it's important for you to know which ones you actually need. And that's where you need to be aware of where your strengths lie as an author. And if you don't, if this is your first book and you have no idea whether it's good or not, you have no idea whether you need a developmental editor or a copy editor, a proofreader, my advice is you start with an editorial assessment. So you take an experienced editor in your genre who's worked in traditional publishing companies, and you ask them to just evaluate your manuscript. And they're going to write a 5 to 15 or 20-page report explaining to you what the strengths are in your writing, what the weaknesses are, if you have any plot points, your character development, your character arcs, your narrative arc, if you have any problems with the way you write dialogue, your world building, all these kind of structural things that compose your story. If it's nonfiction, the way your book is structured, whether your points come across clearly, whether you're making too many points or not. So it's basically, one-off report on all aspects of the manuscript. They're not going to correct grammar, typos, and things like that. They're just going to write you a letter, professional letter that goes over everything in your manuscript. So that will tell you, if they tell you, look, your book's almost perfect, you've got these two characters to make them a little bit more three-dimensional, but other than that, it's all good, then you can move on to copy editing and proofreading. So copy editing and proofreading, they focus on the mechanics of the language. So typos, grammar, fact-checking, consistency in the way you spell things, whether you're using hyphens, em dashes, n dashes, things like that. So it's very line by line, word by word, and very mechanical. Or maybe your editor who did the editorial assessment tells you, look, you need to revise your manuscript because you have several plot holes here and there. So you need to change this character in this way. So you kind of rewrite your manuscript based on their feedback, and then you submit it to a developmental editor. And a developmental editor is going to do the same as someone who does an editorial assessment, except they're going to go more in depth. They're going to produce an editorial letter, so an editorial assessment. And on top of that, they're going to annotate your book directly and make comments on structure, plot, characters, dialogue, etc., directly within your book. So that's also called sometimes line editing, because they go line by line, but they don't focus on typos and on grammar. They focus on overarching story and structure. Cool. So how much should you budget for editing? And I'm going back to what I said before. There are a lot of companies offering editing out there. There are a lot of companies offering packages. So these prices that I'm giving you here, they come from over 3,000 quotes exchanged on the Reedsy marketplace. So they're kind of market prices for editing in the industry. So if you get an editor somewhere who tells you, look, I charge 0.5 cents per word, or $0.5 dollars per 100 words, you're going to think, wait, that's way below what developmental editors charge in the industry. So probably you're not spending the time you should spend, or you're not qualified, or you're not experienced, so you're undercharging. If you get a company that tells you, oh, editing is going to cost you $10,000, you're going to be like, wait, even if you do a round of developmental editing, a round of copy editing, a round of proofreading, on my $80,000 amount to $10K. So use these prices to calculate how much you should budget for editing. And then when companies approach you, make sure that it falls within that budget. So this is just a table. I'll provide the slides afterwards to the whole struggling writers group. Don't worry. So we'll get all that info. But this is just a table that recaps a little bit the prices of different levels of editing by word count. Now over to cover design. So how much should you cover budget for cover design? Probably, if it's a professional designer, again, around $500, $600. So 66% of quotes, and we're talking thousands of quotes, on Reedsy were between $200 and $800. So this is a range you should budget for cover design. You're going to find a lot cheaper artists out there. I've heard about cover designers who charge $20, $50 for a cover design. That means that they're not professional cover designers. Let's be perfectly honest. Or they're good at cover design, but they're not putting in the work on each cover that a professional cover designer would, because there's no way otherwise to produce a cover for $50. Like, you'd be working under minimum wage. So what to expect from a proper cover designer? What do these prices reflect? If you pay someone $600 for a cover, what should you expect to get? That's the real question. And obviously that question is also, if a cover designer is offering to do my cover for $100 or $150, am I going to get all these things? Because all these things are important. So the usual process is you provide a brief and inspiration. It's very, very important. You need to explain to the cover designer who your target market is, what your book's about, if there are any important characters, if there are any things you want on the cover. So you provide a brief and inspiration. Based on that, they'll go away and they'll work on a series of concepts. Then you choose a concept, and then you have several rounds of iterations. To give you an example, I had this book, A Banquet of Crumbs. I give a brief to my designer, and then he comes back to me and says, okay, I've got these 5 concepts. I've got concepts that are just all about type, so very font type focused. I've got another one that's like stock photo with type on it. I've got another one that's illustration based. And I've got 2 others are kind of mixes. And then you say, okay, I like this direction. So you pick a direction, and then they're going to produce another round of concepts. Now, close to 90% of designers on our marketplace provide at least 3 initial design concepts. So if you hire a professional cover designer, whether it's on Reedsy or elsewhere, make sure that you get that, because it's really important to be able to pick a direction. Then, as I said, they create a second round of concepts. So this was for book Life in the Loop. The author chose one direction, and then the designer made another round of concepts, a lot more than 3, for the editor to pick for the author to pick their final cover. So in the end, the author went for this one. So this is what we call an iteration. They iterate on the first concept you picked. So 70% of Reedsy designers provide 2 to 3 rounds of iterations. So again, if you find these designers out there who say they make covers for $50, probably what they're going to do is they're going to create a cover for you and say, here you go, here's your cover. And if you're not happy with it, well, too bad, you spent $50. Now, if you pay a professional Reedsy cover designer $600 to create your cover, they're going to do a first round of concepts. You're going to pick a direction, they're going to create a second round of concepts, and then you're going to have iterations until you get to the perfect final cover that you're happy with. So that's what you should expect from a professional cover designer. Cool. So now let's go over to typesetting and formatting. So for book interior design, you can budget, if you hire a professional, between $500 and $1,000. Now, there are a lot of tools that can help you make your interior design yourself. So one of them is Reedsy Book Edit. If you have a Reedsy account, just log in, or otherwise sign up. It's free. It looks like this. You've got chapters on the left and parts matter, so you can basically format your book. You can import your book and then format it in here, and then we export EPUB file and a PDF, so print-ready file, that work with all the distributors and retailers. So effectively, you do the interior design on your own using a super simple program that is free. Other alternatives are Draft Digital templates, Vellum. Drafted digital templates are free. Vellum is really, well, it's quite pricey and it's only used on Mac, but a lot of authors swear by it. So take a look at it. I am obviously biased, but I do recommend using the Reedsy Book Editor. Now, generally, you have a round of proofreading. So why I'm putting proofreading here is that traditionally, in traditional publishing, proofreading was, well, what the word actually suggests. You do a last proof on the final files. That means the typeset, the formatted files, and you do a last proof of them on them to make sure that you catch any remaining typos that haven't been coded through copy editing, and also that you catch any formatting mistakes or mistakes that have been introduced through the formatting. Now, if you use digital tools like a Reedsy Book Editor, mistakes are not going to be introduced during the typesetting stage, so you can do the formatting directly after copy editing. And now we're moving over to distribution. Basically means getting your book different stores. So Amazon, Apple iBooks, Kobo, Barnes & Noble, etc. So there are two ways to do that. You can upload directly to the retailers. So each retailer, Amazon, Kobo, Apple, Barnes & Noble here, one tool or one website that allows you to upload your book, effectively publish your book directly on their store. So for Amazon, that's the famous Kindle Direct Publishing. You go to kdp.amazon.com, I think. Yeah, that's the URL. And then you follow the steps to publish your book on Amazon. Kobo has Kobo Writing Live. Apple has an app called iTunes Producer, which is only available on Mac. And Barnes & Noble has a website called Nook Press. So with all these, you can upload directly to their e-retailer. Then another option is to use an aggregator. An aggregator is a website that is where you're going to input the info about your book, so title, metadata, all of that, and then you're going to hit publish. And instead of just putting your book on one retailer, a bunch of different ones. So Drafted Digital is the one I recommend. It can upload to Amazon, it can upload to Kobo, it can upload to Apple, Barnes & Noble, and a bunch of other retailers. There's also StreetLib and PublishDrive. I recently wrote a post on ebook distribution on the Reedsy blog, so if you go to blog.reedsy.com, you'll be able to read that post that basically has all the information you can dream of about ebook and distribution. There's one thing to take into account is whether you want to be exclusive to Amazon or not, because Amazon does offer you perks if you only upload to them through KDP, and that's their KDP Select program. I'm not going to go into it now, but just Google pros and cons of exclusivity with Amazon, and you'll get a bunch of blog posts that list the pros and cons of exclusivity with Amazon. Print distribution, I recommend two outlets, CreateSpace and IngramSpark. Again, you'll have the slide, so you'll be able to compare the two of them. They're fairly similar. Now, what really matters is if you don't want to do all the research around distribution, follow this distribution setup. Use Kindle Direct Publishing to sell direct to Amazon. Use Kobo Writing Live to sell direct to Kobo, and then use the Drafted Digital to aggregate the other e-retailers. And then you're set. Ebook distribution done. Print distribution, use CreateSpace for Amazon distribution. If you want also your book to have a chance to be picked up by brick and mortar bookstores in your country, use IngramSpark for other stores. So effectively, you'll be using CreateSpace just to distribute to Amazon because CreateSpace is owned by Amazon, so you'll get the best royalties using CreateSpace to sell on Amazon. So you use, and then you will use IngramSpark for the rest of the stores. Now, marketing. Now, marketing is a whole topic in itself. I really recommend you browse our resources on marketing on the Reedsy site. We've got a free Reedsy Learning course on Book Marketing 101, which goes over all of this here. And we've also got individual courses on mailing lists, Amazon metadata, and Facebook ads and Amazon ads. But to give you a framework for marketing, there are two separate types of activities. There are activities you should be doing all the time, even in between book releases, and that's like everything that pertains to building your platform. And that should come before you publish your first book. That's setting up your author website, keeping it updated, and setting up your mailing list, and interacting frequently with your reader audience through your mailing list. Then there are activities that you need to do every time you publish. Every time you publish a book, you need to research Amazon metadata, so Amazon categories, Amazon keywords. Where are you going to list your book on the Amazon store, and which keywords are you going to use? That is incredibly important. That's like Amazon can market your book for you, can show your book for you to a bunch of readers if you get those categories and keywords right, and if you do some promotion in your book. You need to write a really strong blurb. You need to keep your author page on Amazon updated, and then you need to get reviews. And you also need to find ways to promote your book. And that's for every release, you should draft a marketing plan and know which channels you're going to use to promote your book, and what your pre-launch and post-launch strategies are. And when I talk about channels, there are all these. Distributing advanced review copies through Goodreads, for example, to reviewers in order to get reviews at launch. Using crowdfunding, using Facebook ads, using Amazon ads, scheduling price promotion. So you discount your book maybe a week after launch, and you try to get a book pub or another type of price promotion deal. You run giveaways, you do PR. If your book's nonfiction, PR can work. You do blog tours, you're active on social media, things like that. So as I said, to learn more about MOOC marketing, check out Reedsy Learning. We've got 30 courses now, 25,000 students enrolled. Courses only take you 5 minutes a day, so it's worth taking those 5 minutes a day to learn about vital subjects around book marketing. So this closes the self-publishing chapter. Now I'm going to go into traditional publishing, because I think what's really important is to know what to expect from a traditional publisher, because a lot of authors don't know that. So you remember the steps in self-publishing? It was fairly easy. Now these are the steps in traditional publishing. Obviously, you're not doing all the steps, but it gives you an idea of that the process is a lot more complex. So first, as an author, if you want to get a traditional publishing deal, in most cases, you'll need to find an agent. That agent, in order to get that agent, you need to write a query letter. But let's say you find an agent. That agent's going to review your book. It's going to do a developmental edit on your book. So that's great, because you basically get a developmental edit from someone who's incredibly experienced at that, and a literary agent. Then hopefully they find your publishing deal. So you get published. Congratulations. So you get published. Your book gets acquired by your publishing company. That goes to the acquisitions editor who acquired your book. They're going to do another round of developmental edit to make sure that they're happy with the book they're going to publish. Then it goes to a copy editor, which is usually outsourced to a freelancer, oftentimes to a Reedsy freelancer, because like publishing companies also use Reedsy to find freelancers. And then the book is going to be produced. So depending on the complexity of the book, there will be production decisions, and then it will receive a cover design, sometimes our freelancers, sometimes by the art director in-house. Then we'll go for typesetting and formatting, so the interior design. They'll be proofread one last time, printed, distributed, and marketed. Now, I'm going to go over the 5 myths of traditional publishing, because your authors, again, who want to go into traditional publishing for these reasons. And it's really important to debunk these myths so that you don't generate false hopes when you're approaching publishers. Number one myth is that it's your book, so you're the boss. And that's not the case. Not because you're not the boss, but because it's not your book. When I say, if we go here to this slide, you can see there's an acquisitions editor. What an acquisitions editor does is they acquire your book. They acquire the rights to your book. Once they have the rights to your book, they're the boss. You're not the boss. It's their book. It's not your book. Sure, you've authored it. You have copyright on it. But production decisions, editorial decisions, cover design decisions, marketing decisions are going to be theirs. Most publishers nowadays, I'd say most publishers, are going to involve you in those decisions, but some will not, because they'll think, I know what I'm doing, and probably know what they're doing. But again, go back to the question of editorial control and control for all these decisions. Be aware that you might not have a word to say in all these decisions if you go through a traditional publishing path. Second myth is, I found a publisher, so I'm a published author now, traditionally published. I can quit my day job because I'm officially an author. I'm full-time. I'm receiving my advance. Well, it's great. You received an advance of maybe 5K, 10K. That's going to last you a few months. But think that your book's probably gonna take a few years to be published, and in the meantime, you've got 10K. That's it. So don't quit your day job. Absolutely not. Third myth is the publisher will launch a huge marketing campaign. I've been over this. Do you have marketing departments which are going to help you? But more than like do the marketing for your book, they will teach you how to market your book, which is just as important or even more important. But expect to be doing the lion's share of the marketing, and certainly don't expect a huge marketing campaign with billboards in the underground or all over the city, because only Stephen King, Neil Gaiman, and a handful of other authors get that. Myth number 4 is, I signed with a publisher, so my book's going to be published any minute now. It's not any minute. It's not even next year. It usually takes between 1-2 years for a book to be published after it's acquired by the acquisitions editor. So you see that process again. It's a long process, not just because there are a lot of steps in it, but because each step takes a lot of time. So generally, from the moment you find an agent and the moment your book is released, it's at least 2-3 years. And myth number 5 is, I've got a publisher now, so they're just going to acquire everything I write. And that's not true. They're going to wait to see how your book does when they publish it. So they acquire one book or one series, if you're lucky. They acquire one book or one series. They publish it. And then they see the reaction. If that book or series sells well, and attracts a big audience, then if you write another book or another series, the publisher is going to be interested in it. If the book doesn't do well, it actually kind of closes the doors to that publishing company for you, because they're going to be like, sure, we published your book in the past and we thought it was going to do great, but it didn't. So it's hard for us now to justify acquiring your next book. So it's not automatic. If you get a publishing deal for a book or series of books, it doesn't mean that publisher is going to offer you the same deal or even another deal on another book. Now that we've been over the myths, there are obviously really good sides to traditional publishers and good reasons to go for traditional publishing. First, you get an advance. You don't have to pay for anything. Second, and I really can't overstate that, is that you will work with the top editor who will root for your book. And that's generally why you see so many traditionally published authors so happy, because they've had an editor who has acquired their book, who's defended their book in meetings within that publishing company, who sold that book to the marketing department, and who's really working. And generally, it's really, really competent people and really, really great editors who root for your book. And there's probably nothing better that can happen for an author than that. If you hire a freelance editor as a self-publishing author, that editor is going to root for your book as well, but you're paying that editor as well. So it's kind of, yeah, there's a bias there. It's not the same type of relationship. Number 3, you get access to literary outlets, reviews, and prizes. So all the last few things that self-publishing authors don't have access to, obviously, are literary outlets, reviews, and prizes. You will have a marketing team working on your book. So previously, I said that you shouldn't expect huge marketing campaigns, and you shouldn't expect for the publisher to do the work for you, but you can expect them to do some work for you. And that's already a lot in this industry. And finally, your book will be available for some time in bookstores. If your book doesn't sell, it will be destocked. It won't be stocked anymore in the bookstore, but your book will be available for some time in bookstores, which drives a lot of discoverability and is also really nice as an author if you've got your books stored in Barnes and Noble, for example. Now, so I've gone through what traditional publishers do. Now, if you're interested in pursuing traditional publishing, you probably want to get a literary agent first. There are a few cases where you don't need to find a literary agent if you're going to submit to digital imprints or small independent publishers or crowdfunding publishers. All of these will accept unagented submissions, so submissions from the author directly. If you want to go after big five or big independent publishers, you will need an agent because these publishers will be close to unagented submissions. How to find a literary agent, that's a whole other topic. We've got a great post on that on Reedsy. But in a nutshell, you write a query letter, you research literary agents, you send your query letter, and you wait to hear back. Again, you'll have the slide, so you'll be able to check out these resources here. If you submit direct to publishers, it's the exact same idea as querying an agent. You write your submission letter, you research publishers, and then you query publishers, and you wait to hear back. If you're publishing nonfiction, you will need a book proposal first. So you're not just like sending your manuscript and a query letter, you're sending a book proposal to a publisher. And you can actually send that book proposal before you write the book in many cases. So here you have everything that the book proposal needs to have. But these are fairly obvious things. A title page, a hook, so something that will basically get the editor interested in your book, table of contents, a synopsis of the book, an analysis of competition, so other books out there that have had strong sales and why your book is better. You get the idea. On memoirs and children's books, so if you're writing a memoir, you follow the same rules as for nonfiction. And you'll need both a book proposal and a full manuscript. So you can't send a book proposal without having written your manuscript if you've written a memoir, unless, again, you're a celebrity. If you're a celebrity, then you send a book proposal and publishers will run to sign you. Children's books, you follow the same rules as for adult fiction. You make sure you do not get your book illustrated. You do not pay for an illustrator. The publisher will get an illustrator, and they have their own illustrators, and they have their own branding and type of illustration that they've built over the years. So you don't want to mess with that. And you need to know exactly which age group you're writing for. That's really, really, really important in children's books. Now, to close this presentation, I'm going to go over kind of how you can go from self-publishing to traditional publishing and vice versa. Because, again, hybrid is the name of the game nowadays, so you need to know what kind of different types of hybrid authors there are out there. Now, the common types of hybrid authors are authors who have a deal with traditional publishers and who also self-publish on the side. That's the best way to make money nowadays as an author, because you get two kinds of income streams, and generally in two different genres. Your traditional publisher goes bust, or for some reason, well, you still have your self-publishing income. Amazon changes the rules, and suddenly your books don't sell anymore. Your self-published books don't sell anymore, while you still have your traditional publishing income. So that's why hybrid is really important. Hybrid is only possible if you don't have an exclusivity clause in your contract with the traditional publisher. So make sure, again, when you get a contract from a traditional publisher, consult legal experts and make sure that there's nothing in that contract that prevents you from self-publishing other books in other genres, or even other books in the same genre. There's no reason why they should prevent you from that. Another type of hybrid is you self-publish, but the publisher acquires a type of rights. So, for example, you self-publish your book, it does really well. So publishers become interested, and they acquire the print rights, very rare. The audio rights, very common. The foreign rights, very common. Or the movie rights, very rare for your book. So you keep the ebook rights, but publishers buy other types of rights. In audio, that happens a lot through Audible. Audible is the audio publishing company owned by Amazon, and they contact most authors in commercial fiction who get strong sales. So if you're a self-publishing author and your books are selling really well, you should expect an email at some point from Audible saying, "We'd like to buy the rights to your audio rights to your book." Foreign rights, it's generally if you start getting a lot of good sales in a country, some foreign publishers might be interested in acquiring the foreign rights, in which case they'll translate your book and sell it in their some royalties out of that as well. So that's not uncommon. What's a lot more rare is getting the print rights or the movie rights acquired for your book, but that happens. What's very unlikely is you self-publish a book. Well, it's unlikely, not very unlikely. You self-publish a book, and a publisher comes knocking on the door and wants to acquire all the rights. So that's happened a number of times. The Martian, for example, is a good example of that. Hugh Howey, the Wool series. No, Hugh Howey actually got a print deal. Sorry, so it's in this category. There were other authors, Mark Edwards and Louise Voss in the UK, who self-published initially and then got their books acquired by a publisher. And then it's different from this because here the publisher is buying all the rights. So they're gonna re-release the book as an ebook, and you're gonna get, like as usual, 17.5% royalties on the sales of that ebook. And what's very unlikely is that you self-publish, but your print books are distributed by a traditional publisher. So that happened in a few rare cases where the author, so that's the case with Tucker Max, for example, in nonfiction. He got Simon & Schuster to distribute his print books. So he still owned the print rights, but he had a traditional publisher distribute in bookstores his print books. Now I'm going to go over two paths from self-publishing to traditional publishing, because again, as I said, often I get authors telling me I'm going to self-publish first, but my ultimate goal is to find a traditional publisher. So there are two paths to do that. The first one is you self-publish a book. Then you write a new one, you find an agent for that new book, and you sell the rights of that new book to a publisher. So it's basically you self-publish a book, but then you try getting a traditional publishing deal on that second book. It's the easiest way to become hybrid. Path number two is a lot more complicated. Is you self-publish a book, and then you try to get some form of traditional publishing deal for that same book. And in order for that to happen, that book needs to be extra successful, so sell hundreds of thousands of copies. And this is a path that a lot of authors dream about, but it's a lot more unlikely than path one. Like self-publishing a book and getting it picked up by a traditional publisher is a lot more unlikely than self-publishing a book, than writing a new one and getting that new one unpublished picked up by a traditional publisher. So path one is the best way to become a hybrid. And then there's obviously going in the other sense from traditional publishing to self-publishing. Well, everyone should be able to do that unless you have potential exclusivity clauses. If you want to go from traditional published to self-published on a certain book or a series, you want to get your rights reverted back to you, basically. So you need to look into rights reversion clauses. So again, if you get a traditional publishing contract, look into rights reversion clauses and potential exclusivity clauses, because these are going to dictate whether you can self-publish that book or other books or not. You have the links here again. You'll get the slides and you'll get the links to these two organizations that will help you with legal matters with contracts. And you also need to read Kristen Catherine Rush's blog and her business musings every week. You'll get the link to that. She goes into contracts quite at length and has really good info on how you should be thinking as an author nowadays regarding rights. So that's it for the presentation. I hope you enjoyed it. I'm sorry if it was a bit long, but covering self-publishing, traditional publishing, options in between, and how to make the most of each option is really, really long. Again, that presentation's been honed throughout the years. But you feel free to drop me any questions at service@reedsy.com or even ricardo@reedsy.com. You can visit our website if you're not familiar with it, and I'll make sure that you get the slides in the next few days on the Goodreads group, and I'll be available there as well if you have any questions after you get the slides. So thank you very much for listening, and have a good day.